In previous versions of Windows, you actually had two different places where you could start looking at the structure of your computer. They were known as My Computer and Windows Explorer. Now those are kind of still around, but they've changed them a little bit. In the current versions, they've blended them into a single method instead of the two. And this actually is kind of the best of both worlds, so I think it's nice. Let me show you a couple of different ways of accessing it. In older versions of the operating system, one way to get to Windows Explorer was to move down to the Start button, to right-click, and choose Open Windows Explorer. That is still an option, and I'm going to go ahead and click on that just so you can see what it does in Windows 7. Notice that in this case it takes us right into Libraries, which in Windows 7 is where it wants you to consider your starting point. I'm going to go ahead and close this down though, and show you a couple of different options. In Windows 7, by default, you have an icon on your taskbar that also launches Windows Explorer. But for all of our versions of the operating system, we have either an icon for Computer or My Computer, usually sitting on the desktop. Remember that if you don't see this, you can go to the Start button, you can right-click My Computer or Computer, and you can say Show it on the desktop. I'm going to go ahead and give this a double click. Now this is a very similar window, but it's kind of backed up one level. It's not looking at libraries, this is actually looking at the computer as a whole. And this is the way the My Computer window used to open. My Computer was very popular because it showed you things with these large icons that were easy to understand and not very intimidating. Windows Explorer tended to show you just folders and files, which could be more confusing for people, especially when they were new. So again, they've kind of blended the two by giving us the opportunity to look at large icons or different versions of icons on the right and seeing kind of the detailed folder structure on the left. I really think this is a good combination and it's a great thing that's happened. But let's take a look at what we're actually seeing here. In the default window, we're seeing our hard drives. In this case, I have my hard drive, which is my C drive. It tells me the letter designation, and it also gives me the name. This one happens to have been renamed Windows 7 Hard Drive. Yours will probably just say Hard Drive. You will also notice that as I pause over things, whether it be a drive, a folder, or a file, I get a little pop-up that's called a tooltip. Tooltips provide simple information. In this case, it's telling me, because this is a drive, that its total size is 31.9 gigabytes, and I currently have 20.3 gigabytes free. That's very good information. I can also see that I have other types of devices, and while on different operating systems these may be organized a little bit differently, you should be able to see from the Computer or My Computer window all of the drives that are attached to your computer. If I look at the very bottom of this window, I can see some general information about my computer because that's the level I'm currently looking at. It tells me the name of my hard drive. It tells me that the work group I'm in is work group. That has to do with networking. We'll talk about that in a later chapter. It tells me that I have 512 megabytes of available RAM memory, and that I'm currently working on an Intel Core 2 CPU processor. We'll take a look at all of these different kinds of hardware things in a later chapter as well, but I just wanted you to see that we are getting some detailed information without having to physically open up the properties related to a drive, a file, or a folder. If I move back up in this window and I click on my hard drive to select it, now it's shaded. Now at the bottom of the window, I get to see individual specific information about this drive. Windows 7 hard drive. It shows me the little bar graph and tells me how much total size I have. It also tells me things like the file system is NTFS. Okay, well that's pretty technical, but at least it's good information. A lot of good information can be gathered by simply clicking on drives, files, and folders and seeing what you have. What I really want to do though is I want to find out what's on my hard drive. And there are a couple of different ways I can do that. One way is to simply double click on this icon. If I double click, it's like expanding it and showing me what the contents are. Now because this is my hard drive, I see all kinds of technical stuff that has to do with the operating system and system files, things that I probably don't care much about. Just as an FYI for you though, this Program Files folder is always important because Program Files, by default, is where all software is installed. So if you're looking for software options, that's the folder you would look at. The users folder tells me who the users are that have profiles on this computer. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into networks and user accounts. I then have a Windows directory. And I say, well, okay, but what I'm actually used to looking at is My Documents. Where is that? Well, actually, My Documents is not found as a folder right on the hard drive. That's part of a user profile. So let's go ahead and double-click Users. Usually by default, there are a couple of different profiles that are on a computer, even if you never see them. They include an administrator account and a guest account. In Windows Vista, in Windows 7, there's also something called Public. This is a place where you can put files that you want to share with everybody without worrying about permissions. I happen to be the administrator. That's who I'm logged on as, so I'm going to double-click. When I do that, I now get to see all of the folders that are created specifically for me as the administrator or as the user. This includes my desktop because the desktop is unique for each user. It shows me things like my favorites, and here's what I was actually looking for, My Documents. Now before we go any further, I want you to notice that at the top of this window, we actually get to see the breadcrumbs. So if I've lost track of where I came from my hard drive, into the Users folder, and now I'm in a folder called Administrator. When I double-click My Documents, here I can see the WordPad document that I created a while ago, and I can also see that the breadcrumbs are changing. A couple of things about using the breadcrumbs. First of all, you will see that there's an arrow. Now the arrow we know is really the path, but I can actually click on that arrow as well. When you do that, it shows you what is one level up from where you are, in this case. In other words, to the right it says My Documents, so instead of choosing My Documents, I also could have chosen Contacts, Desktop, Downloads, Favorites, and so forth. If I click the arrow between Users and Administrator, it says, well, you happen to have chosen Administrator, but your other option was to choose Public. So instead of going back levels and then coming back into certain things, if I wanted to change what I was looking at, I could simply use this down arrow and say, oh, I wanted to look at Downloads. Or, again, very quickly, I can use a drop-down and say, no, I really actually did want to go to My Documents. That's one method of navigating. Another method of navigating is to just click on the folder that you want to go back to. If I wanted to go back all the way to the Users folder, I can simply click here. And again, it brings me back to that folder so I can make a different choice. All of this makes it very simple to use. Let me go ahead and double-click Administrator, double-click My Documents, just to get back to where we were. The second component of the breadcrumbs that I wanted to show you is how to actually have it display the file path. That's this little folder icon all the way back. And if I click here, it converts it to the traditional, if you will, computer file name. C:\users\administrators\documents. If I click the folder again, nothing happens. This is one of those interesting things. It's kind of a one-way switch. So what I'm going to do is click the back button, because to the left of your breadcrumbs or your file path is a back and next button. I'll say go back, and that's one way to reset your breadcrumbs. Now I'll go back into My Documents. And again, we can see that we're back to the old breadcrumbs, and I can see the one file that's located within the My Documents folder. Now I went through an awful lot of clicking, and yes, some of it was back and forth just to show you how to navigate, but that was all using this main portion of the screen. There's also a pane on the left-hand side called the navigation pane, and this actually can make jumping around between different parts much simpler because you don't have to progressively go backwards and forwards. At the top, you see an option called Favorites, and this includes places that you typically go to very often, like your desktop, or you can even click Recent Places. Now, I love Recent Places because that is anywhere that I've actually gone to in the last, several tries. Because I moved to several different folders, actually hundreds of different folders over a week, this might be the fastest way to get where I need to go. Depending on your version of Windows, you will also see different options below that. Because Windows 7 is all of a sudden into this thing called a library, it wants to show you your libraries, which include documents, music, pictures, and videos. What you will see in prior versions are actual links to My Documents, My Pictures, My Videos. It just takes out the library functionality. You also should see an option, again depending on which version you have as to how it looks, for the computer itself. In this case, I can see the computer and the little arrow is pointing or angled down. That means that if I expand the computer out, I'm currently at my hard drive. If I want to see what's in the hard drive, I can click the right pointing arrow. That then turns to a down angled arrow, and these are all of those folders that I originally saw when I opened my computer. I could expand the users folder, and I could expand the administrators folder. This is technically called drilling down. It's something that we actually did normally on the right hand side, but if I didn't want to go through all of that, sometimes this is a little bit faster. What I don't like about using the navigation pane in this way, though, is ultimately you can get lost. If you're all the way down here looking at documents, you actually have to go all the way back up and say, well, geez, how did I even get here? Oh yeah, that's right, Windows 7 hard drive, which was under computer. Regardless of how you choose to navigate, you can either get to places by using the navigation pane or by using the main pane on the right-hand side. They both do the same thing, just in slightly different ways. If you don't want to see all of this detail, you can always click a level and its little arrow to collapse it back down. In this case, I've completely collapsed computer, so I'm no longer seeing any of the drives. I'm still, however, looking at My Documents because I haven't clicked on anything.